I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the boss roster for the new top-down Metroidvania, Crypt Custodian, developed by Kyle Thompson. You play as Pluto, a recently deceased black cat who becomes sentenced to cleaning the underworld for an eternity. You roam the various regions of the afterlife, collecting power-ups, cleaning up garbage, and making new friends, all with the goal of breaking into the palace where good spirits go, so you can see what it's like on the other side, and maybe even use the fabled crystal mirror which allows spirits a chance to go back to the world of the living for just a brief moment. Suffice it to say, I was in tears during the ending. The gameplay is fluid, the levels are extremely well designed, and the enemies you face are a real treat. Every foe in this game uses a bullet hell style attack that is well telegraphed and easy to learn. Mastering how to beat each enemy becomes paramount to survival, and this goes more so for the bosses. There are 12 to face throughout the game, each with their own bullet hell patterns and gimmicks to deal with. Each moveset is extremely fair, and the game encourages you to learn their fights thanks to a handy-dandy boss rush mode found in the game's main menu. It allows you to rematch bosses on any difficulty level, and includes a ranking system that takes into account your health and time taken to complete the fight. This feature alone convinced me to make this video, and given I've S+'d every boss on every difficulty and 100% completed this game, I feel qualified. So let's jump right in. All 12 Crypt Custodian bosses, ranked. Let me know which boss you like the most down below. At number 12, we have the Gunk Goliath. A gigantic slime, as is par for the course in any good Metroidvania or JRPG, we have to take this beastie down to retrieve Mira's tablecloth for her dinner party. The Goliath uses 3 different attacks to harm the player. The first is a tentacle swipe. It'll extend one of its gooey appendages and then swing it in the direction of the player. A pretty simple move to avoid, though if you're not paying attention for its indicator, you can get hit on that initial extension. The second move is a jump slam, followed by a series of fiery projectiles. You can easily avoid all of these attacks by jumping as the slime hits the ground. Simple, effective, not a problem. Its third move, though, allows it to summon a host of smaller enemy slimes to get in the way of the player. On easy and normal, these slimes serve as little more than a brief inconvenience. You can ignore them and you'll likely be fine. But on hard mode, the slimes can shoot fiery projectile attacks, making them a suddenly more dangerous foe. This is one of my favorite hard mode additions in the game, as it recontextualizes the boss's tentacle swipe move. That's because said swipe can destroy the smaller slimes surrounding you, acting as a crowd-clearing tool if you can anticipate the move coming. That's incredibly smart boss design, and if it wasn't for the fact that the normal and easy mode variants feel a little too simple by comparison, I think it would rank higher on the list. At number 11, we have the Imposter. Pretending to be shopkeeper Roy the Mole, this imposter has actually imprisoned the spirit, and it's up to you to free your newfound friend and send this guy back to the Shadow Realm. The first phase is very fast and frenetic, the imposter using a lot of magical attacks, of which it'll cycle through 4 of them, before ending with a slam that leaves him stunned. You can damage the boss during the magic attacks if you really want to risk it, but I'd personally dodge what you can and get him while he's out of breath. Hard mode adds more projectiles to many of the first phase's attacks, but it doesn't actually change how you deal with them, it just gives you less margin for error. Phase 2 sees the imposter donning his true form, this gigantic dark rock-like spirit, who switches to using homing projectiles and charge attacks to do damage. On easy mode, the projectiles won't home in on you, but normal and hard mode, you'll be needing to carefully time your dodges and positioning as those shots are accurate. I like the way its attacks are really well indicated. There's a row of projectiles that only fire vertically from the point they hit, and it's shown in the attack animation, really good stuff. ending with a rather comical moment where the imposter challenges us to attack the fake Roy. It's just the comedy I needed to make the fight memorable, though it lands this far down on the list because I feel the first phase drags on a tad too much for my tastes, especially in the boss rush mode where I'm trying to get through it as quickly as possible to give myself more leeway for phase 2. At number 10, we have the Stone Golem. Found within Sculptor's Peak, we were told to chisel any blank stones we could find, and it looks like curiosity killed the cat. Its first phase is relatively straightforward. It has a spinning top Beyblade style move you need to dodge to avoid, and the moment he begins to lose momentum is when you need to pounce. Its other move allows it to summon spires of rock in a circular formation, and depending on the difficulty, there'll be more spires to avoid per ring. This was the move that got me the most during my S+ runs, because my depth perception decided to take the day off. You can dodge through the second and third rings with a little careful precision to get some cheeky damage in though. The last move involves the boss stretching its arms out to the sides of the arena, throwing itself back and forth while shooting flames the player has to avoid. It looks hectic, but is far more lenient than you'd expect. Definitely a big step up from the first boss of the game in terms of that level of intimidation. Then the second phase hits and the top of the statue comes off. Now the same attacks continue, but every once in a while, the statue's head will appear above you and slam into the ground, creating a series of spikes you have to jump over to avoid, while also managing the boss's normal moveset. Hard mode adds more projectiles and a faster overall speed to the fight, but once you've mastered one difficulty, the others will follow relatively quickly. A really solid, fun fight. I just prefer some of the other boss designs more. At number 9, we have the Pot of Spiders, the first boss of the game. Found at the end of Pearl's Shrine, I was genuinely impressed at the initial level of difficulty this boss had, given you don't have any movement tools aside from a grounded dodge roll and barely any upgrades. The game's asking a lot of you here. The pot will try to ram into the player, dealing contact damage if you're not careful. Then it'll launch a series of spiders from the top, which will all land and then begin to converge on the pot. You've got to deal damage while also keeping an eye on the spiders approaching so you're not in the way when they arrive. Every once in a while, the pot will also swarm the boss arena, sending various patterns of spiders out you've got to jump over to avoid. I found some luck hitting some of the spiders back towards the pot, but it wasn't exactly a strategy I felt much confidence in. The second half of the fight, the pot will launch larger clumps of spiders that, when they hit the ground, fan out in a circular motion, creating some real tough patterns to dodge. For what is the first boss in the game, I hesitate to call it the easiest. I actually think the Gunk Goliath takes that spot. It left a really good impression on me, and I love that unlike the rest of the boss roster, which relies on spikes, fiery projectiles, and magic, all of the attacks here are just the spiders from the pot rushing the player. Nightmare fuel for an arachnophobe like me, but I really appreciate the creativity. At number 8, we have the Ice Witch. This cackling hag is frozen Skelly, the lead singer of a band, who we've been sent to rescue. There are a handful of bosses in Crypt Custodian that feel very distinct from the rest of the afterlife, creatures that you can tell aren't spirits or from Earth. The Ice Witch's animations give off this vibe, and it makes her feel extremely threatening. I will say her laugh is going to be stuck in my head for a while, given how many times I heard it during my boss rush session. Resetting the fight a ton meant hearing that opening cackle over and over and over. Her moveset consists of 4 different moves. There's her Flake Breath, where she shoots snowflakes from her mouth, which boomerang back to the top of the screen. There are some spots you can stand to have a higher chance of avoiding the attack, as I found out during my rematch with the Ice Witch. Solid move. Her snowball attack is next, causing a small avalanche that sends a series of snowballs across the arena. Depending on the difficulty, there will be more or less snowballs to ram into, and I definitely struggled to dodge this one. There's her icicle stab, where she'll send a series of projectiles down at the player, which creates spike lines you have to dodge to avoid. And most infamously, her snowflake wind attack. This denotes the second half of the fight, as she'll send a series of snowflakes from the left to the right of the screen, and then after around 5 seconds, the wind will blow those snowflakes back to the left again, forcing you to remember the pattern and dodge accordingly. Only in the boss rush mode, you also need to be doing damage to either her hands or her face during this move so you can beat the timer. It was the most RNG move I encountered in the game, as I really just had to wait for a run where there were less snowflakes near her weak spots. A really good fight with immaculate theming, but I kinda wish we had more build-up of her in her zone. We get one NPC telling us to watch out for her, and that's it. I needed a bit more for such a terrifying creature. At number 7, we have Kendra, the Arbiter of the Afterlife. After discovering her dirty secret that she's been keeping the palace all to herself this entire time and dumping all her garbage on the rest of us, it's time to take her down and fix this hierarchy. I really enjoyed this fight when I took her on as part of the story. She's got a lot of tricky attacks, and I like that you have to play very carefully because many of her moves come out fast. The cross boomerang was brutal. Or how about the skeleton walls that she can summon in packs of 8? I'll be blunt, I still don't know how to dodge that move consistently. She's got a massive slam attack that has very deceptive dodge timing, and some projectile attacks like flaming trash which differ depending on your difficulty. On the hardest setting, it can be overwhelming with so many projectiles on the field at once, and overcoming it took a lot of trial, error, and a bit of luck from my part. Her phase 2 shifts her character completely, revealing the true feelings underneath, of a creature who's so used to living with her own privilege that she feels completely above the rest of the afterlife. So getting to see her calm facade break is a personal victory for me. Her phase 2 is arguably easier than her phase 1, with less attacks to worry about, but with more projectiles to keep track of. However, if you're going for a no damage S+ run, you'll find Kendra's phase 2 absolutely nerve-wracking. You have to learn to not get greedy and take your time, lest she burrow underground while you're attacking, immediately hitting you with spikes. I love the challenge. She really was the hardest fight in the boss rush, and by the time you reach her, you understand this game's language and can handle all of her unique attacks with skill and precision. And then you get clipped by a single spike and you feel like screaming, but I digress. If I can just take a quick moment of your time, we're trying to reach 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you enjoy this video and you want to see more, consider parrying that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future videos. Or you can go the extra mile and become a channel member. It's $4.99 a month, you get early access to future videos, you get a shout out in the description and at the end of every video as well, and in the future there may be some special Let's Plays just for you. So, enjoy this video, go buy Crypt Custodian, there'll be a link in the description, it's such a good game. Back to the video. At number 6, we have Grief, who manifests from the pain that Wailer the Spirit is feeling at being left alone. I really like the story here because it shows that not every spirit within the afterlife is happy-go-lucky or getting by. Showing characters that mourn their past lives is important in any afterlife story, and it was a real good change of pace, especially as Wailer was the last friend I needed to find during my playthrough. His fight utilizes the burrow ability that was vital towards the preceding level, though I do wish it had more usage outside of avoiding one very large, very telegraphed move. By this point in the game, I had a very strong build, becoming this force of nature. I loved when the boss would spawn in extra enemies and I'd just demolish them in an instant, or how I deftly avoid some of the spikier attacks. I did notice during the boss rush that I could avoid the Faces of Grief attack by hugging the top of the arena though, which I'm assuming wasn't an intended way to avoid the attack. It definitely made the fight easier for me, I'll say that much, but I'm pretty sure it's a bug, so I wanted to include it here. The second phase sees Grief attempting to slam into us himself, zooming across the arena before attempting to crush us, and then the moveset continues. Given we have such a limited arena compared to the rest of the roster, it made for a more claustrophobic encounter, which added to its overall memorability. I do think it's a bit odd that this is the only boss fight in the entire game that doesn't have a save shrine right next to the arena though. I'm not going to complain because the run back is fairly short, but it's an odd choice when every other boss fight doesn't have you going through parts of the level all over again. I'm glad this was my last boss before Kendra. The whole manifestation of grief aspect feels more climactic than had I done the Rail Rider or the Ice Witch as my final boss, you know? At number 5, we have Ghost Slaughter 3, a haunted movie that attempts to slaughter Pluto when they watch it. Already, the unnerving face and long-hooked nose had me very nervous. This was a similar visage to a boss I'd encountered earlier in my playthrough, who we'll get to later, but was definitely the easier of the two. Ghost Slaughter 3's moveset is made to be spooky. He's got his initial slam attack where he'll try to squish you twice, only to go underground on the third slam to follow you with his nose. Then he'll erupt, sending spikes everywhere. This move changes drastically depending on the difficulty, with hard mode having the first slam give off a massive wave of spikes. Impressive stuff. I love the theming of its moveset here, with horrifying claws that surround Pluto which you have to dodge through, or the way it causes various spectral hands to rise from the ground which will converge on the boss, forcing you to get as much damage in as you can and then position yourself in a safe spot. Its phase 2 transition is genius and hilarious. A tombstone appears before the player, followed by a slam attack from the boss as it begins to use its harder moveset. There are butcher knives that slide horizontally along the ground, which you can bait and avoid. But then there's the one move I didn't enjoy, the 4 pillars of fire. They rotate around the boss and you have to jump to avoid them, but the boss is also following you at the same time, making it incredibly hard to predict where the fire will end up next. I found myself getting cornered and taking a lot of damage to this move, to the point where I just found it really annoying. It's the sole reason this boss fight doesn't land higher, because the build-up, the opening cutscene, the overall themed moveset, and the concept of a haunted movie is brilliant. But if I don't like a specific attack, and it's a pretty major one at that, that's how the cookie crumbles. At number 4, we have the Rail Rider, found on the ride that never ends. This demonic spirit doesn't want anybody else on his ride, and wants to cut us off and send us plummeting into the void below. And the completely unique boss arena and concept worked wonders for me. You have 4 minecarts you need to switch between to avoid attacks, while waiting for your moment to strike back. You have to dodge bright red saw blades, which, depending on your difficulty, come out faster or slower. The boss himself will attempt to swipe at you by landing on your cart, and you can figure out where he's going to go by the red outlines on the minecarts before his attacks. He's also got a gun that shoots what I'm assuming are nails? I didn't really check, but I like that in phase 1 it's just 1 stream of bullets, while in phase 2 he has 2 streams, gives a nice level of progression. And he can just chuck his platform at you if he wants. Every now and then, the cart in front of him will move forwards on the track, allowing you to get in melee range and do some damage. I found the Fireball special attack worked wonders here for doing damage to him, as you could hit him from afar. I experimented with the boomerang technique in the boss rush mode as well, but I didn't really like how it felt. I couldn't multitask well enough. The fight is very formulaic, and I can definitely see it dragging on if you don't have the damage per cycle to take him down quickly, but the sheer creativity of the fight lifts it up to a point where I'm not that bothered myself. A fitting end to a haunted amusement park. Shame he missed out on our top 3. At number 3, we have the Tower Haunters, found at the top of the tower. Firstly, absolutely love that before this fight starts, you get to create your own little tag on the arena. Even more so when at the end of the game, it's discovered that Kendra has plagiarized the tag as her own work. Grade A payoff right there. The Tower Haunters themselves are a quartet of spirits who each have their own move they perform, and the challenge is how the moves are often chained and followed up. You've got the Red Spirit, who acts as a self-destruct device, There's the green spirit, who will attempt to diagonally lunge at the player with his sword. There's the purple spirit, who appears above the player and slams down, creating a ring of fire you have to jump over. And then there's the bane of my existence, the yellow spirit, an archer that fires arrows at the player from afar. In Phase 1, you're introduced to very basic variants of these attacks, and on easy mode, that's all you'll experience. But if you're on normal or hard, the fight has a second phase where all the attacks become stronger and deadlier. The red's explosive spikes last for longer and cover more of the arena, the purple adds a second ring of flames to his AoE, and the green sword wielder attacks at a quicker pace. And then the yellow archer decides that violence is in fact the answer. He fires 6 arrows in very quick succession, and if your dash has ran out, or your animation locked on an attack, or you're just too close, you're gonna get sniped. He ended most of my S+ runs in the boss rush, and it took a lot of time for me to get it in my head to not try and punish him. On hard mode, all the attacks come at a quicker pace than normal, creating a frenetic energy that reminds me heavily of the Mantis Lords from Hollow Knight, while their designs give me the Poe sisters from Ocarina of Time's Forest Temple. My only critique is that the RNG of the fight means you never know what moves are coming next, and it can be a real pain when you've got the red spirit appearing 3 times in a row, knowing you can't really punish his attacks. Overall, a brilliant gank fight that represents Crypt Custodian's combat in its purest state. At number 2, we have the Astral Drifters, another gank fight, only this time with a very unique twist. The area you've just explored has a mechanic where every time you dash, the environment shifts between 2 states, with platforms appearing and disappearing, as well as enemies becoming tangible or transparent. When an enemy is transparent, they can't harm you, nor can their projectiles do damage. And that's what makes this boss fight so interesting, as in the first half, the bosses attack you one at a time, and you have to time your dashes so that the boss is vulnerable when finishing an attack, allowing you to strike it. There's the rock rotation attack, where they'll launch a number of rocks outwards, which then retract after a certain point. There's the simple slam, where you need to jump as the boss hits the ground to avoid the slam and spikes. There's a fireball attack, where you have to circle around the boss, avoiding the blasts to do damage. Except if you time your dashes correctly, you can avoid a lot of these projectiles by making them transparent. In the second phase, both bosses are on screen doing different attacks at the same time. One of them is always going to be vulnerable, and the other is always going to be transparent, forcing you to juggle the pair of them in a dance that seems quite daunting your first time through. I found myself dodging one boss's attack, only to make the other boss's fireball projectiles hit me because I wasn't paying attention. As it turns out though, in the boss rush mode, the best strategy is just to not dash at all. It's possible to handle all the attacks in Phase 2 in each difficulty without shifting the arena state, so you only have one enemy to worry about. Which yes, it does diminish the challenge somewhat, but most players aren't going to realize that, and the fact I figured that out for the boss rush meant I still got what was the intended experience in the story. I just love a unique premise, and the concept of shifting the dimensions to make opportunities to damage the bosses was too good to pass up. The Drifters were the first true challenge I faced as a boss fight, but they pale in comparison to our number 1. At number 1, we have the Moon Man. Kyle Thompson, what the fuck? I'm chaperoning the most adorable rats the world has ever seen, collectively known as the Little Ones. And then they get grabbed by a dark hand and dragged away, while I'm forced to face what is easily the scariest creature in the game. No build-up, no warning, and yet in the case of the Moon Man, it works perfectly. He's one of the toughest fights on higher difficulties because of the sheer amount of projectiles he has access to during both phases of his fight. You have to start by attacking his face, avoiding the eye-like attacks he launches at you, and pray you don't get the slower ring rotation attack because that will eat into your time on an S+ run. I love the circular AoE of spikes you have to jump away from, and then jump back into once it clears to avoid the second layer of spikes on the rest of the arena. Very MMO coded. Once the second phase starts, the Moon Man's 4 hands emerge around the side of the arena, and in the main game, I don't think I realized they were actually other hitboxes for the boss, assuming I still had to hit the face. But in the boss rush mode, I rectified my mistake. The attacks get tougher with various spike explosions and the same overall attacks from phase 1, but with added fiery projectiles coming from the various hands when you're not paying attention. Doing this damageless is one of the hardest feats in the game. Doing this fast enough to get S+, even more so. But it's not the challenge that ranks it at number 1, it's the concept. What on earth is the Moon Man? Why is he so terrifying? Why are his animations so creepy? Does he eat spirits? Why does he look like the Ghost Slaughter 3 boss? Do we kill him? Will he come back one day? What are the projectiles he attacks us with? Are they eyes? Are they moons? Are they spirits? This thing is gonna be in my nightmares. And being one of the most fleshed out fights in the game, this supernatural entity made the biggest impression on me to take my number 1 spot. Hey, Post-Edit Villiers here. I've just finished editing this whole video, only to realize I didn't include the gigantic Storm Beetle boss because it doesn't appear in the boss rush menu. It's a chase sequence where you have to complete a ton of parkour challenges until your bug-catching friend drops a giant cage on it. It's more of a stage hazard than an actual fight, so I'm content with not including it on this list, but I wanted to quickly give it a shout out because I would honestly feel pretty guilty otherwise. I had a lot of fun with the platforming and was able to beat this boss on my second attempt, so that goes to show how well the layout of the chase is that I could adapt so quickly. A brilliant job. I'm so sorry I forgot to include it in the main rankings. I'd probably put it just underneath Kendra. And that's my list. Which Crypt Custodian bosses were your favourite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. If you want to try Crypt Custodian yourself, I have left a link to the Steam page down below. I would highly recommend it. It's honestly going to be in my top 10 games of the year. So good, so much fun, absolutely brilliant. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow me if you're comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Discord. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, thank you so much. And I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios!